Hello, everyone. Welcome to Click Moments and Passionate Pursuits, The Unfolding. And we're your hosts, Beth
And Bridget Querns.
And this is where intuitively guided conversations are followed with feral faith, enthusiasm, and joy, bringing new insights, inspiration, and perspectives along the way. And as always, we're excited about the topic. Because today we're going to be talking about that time in our lives where there is this confusion with what's happening outside of us compared to what's happening within us. And sometimes when that's happening, we need to figure out a way to figure out that discrepancy. And so today's episode is about living the pause, the value in pausing in our life and resting, and diving into that discrepancy. That's what we're going to be talking about today. And we're going to start out talking a little bit more about when this pause is relevant and the different ways that you see it show up in your life. I am going to start with an example of where this has happened, and we're going to kind of riff from there. And I remember 3 years ago, 2.5, 3 years ago, when I was leaving my job, I knew I needed to go. My everything in me was saying it's time. My body was absolutely exhausted. I had had several health scares, and I knew that they weren't going to go away, and I knew that there was something that I wasn't paying attention to. I needed to. Every time I kind of be like, what could it possibly be? My mind would just start racing. My body was exhausted. My mind would start racing, frantic, desperate to figure out an answer to what I needed to do. And every single time I started to get into just a little bit of silence, there were always answers in that silence that I didn't know what to do with. I was scared with what I knew was my truth because I didn't know how to move forward walking in a way that was steeped in my truth, and a truth that I couldn't quite come to terms with. And it was almost like it was like I was pushing it down, I was tamping it down, I was like suppressing it. I was saying, this isn't a thing, right? But it was just like right under the surface. So the pause was always a dangerous place to be because it meant that I had to do something. I had to know something. I had to think about something in a new way, and I didn't know where that was going to take.
You sharing that just brought up the memory that I had shared not too long ago, and I'd lost it, but now it's back. So the use of the pause for me was actually a tool as an educator when I would have a classroom of students who were uniquely able to contain that unknowing that comes in the pause, and who I knew would be able to receive it in a formative and helpful way. So as an educator, what I primarily taught were arts-based disciplines. So English language arts, languages, French, and journalism. And in all of those, there's just this kind of thread, this theme that runs through them, which is that we can only walk so close to understanding something before we have to allow our truth to be the full understanding of it. So in literature, especially because I loved literature the most, when you're reading someone else's work, when you're reading their story, when you're reading either fiction or nonfiction or poetry or whatever it may be, you arrive at a place where you can only make so much meaning before you have to acknowledge the fact that there's always going to be ambiguity left. And we would get to a lot of places where I loved Socratic questioning, and I loved running my classrooms based on conversational style and allowing the students to really ask deep, probing questions. And a cool thing would happen was they would ask these deep probing questions about the text, but it wasn't so much about the text, it was more about themselves. And so what they would bring to the reading of the text was themselves. And what they would come to was this place where they would be questioning something, and they knew, and I knew, and everyone else in the classroom knew that the question didn't have an answer, but that they would have to pause and sit in what I call this great space of unknowing, this great pause of unknowing. And they would always ask me, well, Mrs. Corns, what do you think? What's the answer? And the greatest part about being a teacher is being able to turn it around and say, I don't know. Let's explore it together. What does it mean? Because any great author or poet would tell you that part of the work that they put out in the world is cathartic, is a release, is a therapy for them, is just getting their inner mumblings out in something tangible. But the other great part about it is the reception, and how what is this printed concrete word gets morphed and becomes something new for the reader. And so the reader takes meaning from it that maybe wasn't ever necessarily intended by the author, but that's what the pause is for. So that space is where, like, the energy of what the author has fed into this work, and the filters and the experience and the energy of the reader come together, and then a new thing is created, like a new being is birthed into the world from that space. So I've personally come now as an adult to love the pause and to love the space, but it's scary.
You just said like 14 things that my mind's exploding on. Like, I'm just like, whoa. First of all, I'm thinking as a an author and getting ready to put out my first book, and I realized that it's like it's an author's biggest fear is like their words being shifted or made to mean something that it isn't. But yet that's the
But
trouble.
they will.
It always will, because it's no matter how much how clear you can be, you can't be the lens of the other person. The other person is their own being. And so 100% of the time, somebody is going to read something through the filter of themselves. And you can't grow up like they grew up, have the brain that they have the body they have the mind that they have the society that they have, but you can't do any of it. And so literally, like, it's the conundrum. It's like literally, this is why you like the greatest writers just release it and say, I'm just gonna let it go, because there's nothing once it's out there, you can't have it hold the original meaning. And I can't believe how many times I've heard people say, like, somebody will come up to them and be like, you said this, and oh my gosh, this is what it meant to me. And they're like, I never said that. I never even meant that. Like, but they just listen because it comes through that person's, perspective. And what it reminds me of when you were talking is I was thinking about the interrelationship between, when you put something out there and you say your truth. Anytime you're having a direct conversation with somebody, you're giving just a little smidgen of the total picture of what's actually happening in this moment. And this is where it's like when you have those moments where you say something and somebody responds in a way that you're like, what? It's a bit discombobulating. It's that opportunity, I think. Like, what do we all do when that happens? We say it again. And oftentimes we think that when we say it again, it's gonna hold the meaning. And sometimes it does. Sometimes that person actually is able to hear it, depending on your relationship with that person. But sometimes that person just doubles down on the meaning that they hear. And they're like, did you just not hear what you said? And it's like, no. And this is where I think that pause is incredibly important, is when what is happening outside of us doesn't match with our experience inside of us. There's this real opportunity to either leave and come back and try to get some discernment in that space, or ideally staying and asking more questions like, what did you hear me say? Like,
Mm,
what tell me more about what you heard me say, and do you mind if I share what I intended to say, so that we can get to some sort of consensus. But it's usually the pause is the moment that you identify something is askew, something
mm,
isn't matching up. there's
mm,
this there's this moment that our truths and our reality are not the same, and so this is a real opportunity to respond from a space of compassion and intense listening, right? As opposed to proving my point, receiving what you have to say, and hearing what you have to say,
mm.
right?
Yeah. So if someone is facing the pause alone, as you brought up, what you might do if you are hearing it reflected within a relationship. But if someone's facing the pause alone, like I did at a certain point in my life, and I've done many times actually. I've done it many, many, many times because I have many iterations of self that keep bringing up more truth, that keep becoming more whole, a better, more whole picture of myself. But when I've had to go into that pause, first of all, I tend to resist at first because, like you said, I'll start to enter the quiet and I hear myself really loudly. And I know that what I'm hearing is my truth, my big, loud, like capital T truth speaking. But if we're not quite prepared to meet that truth head on,
Mm,
then there's some resistance there in entering the quiet and the stillness and the pause. Um, but what happened was I had to get really honest with myself, and I had to look at this box that I was currently residing in. And I had to ask, do I want to stay the version of me that I'm squishing down into this tiny little box that I no longer fit? Because I could choose to do that. And what happens when we squish things down into boxes is that they get misshapen and kind of broken and no longer know how to take up space other than within that box.
right.
And if I take myself out of this box, then at first I'm just kind of be a puddle, and I'm not going to have a whole lot of shape because I've never learned how to be me without the confines of what the box provided.
Mm,
And there's this point where you've sat with that long enough, where you've like stretched out long enough that you start to feel strong again, and you start to feel like this new creation again. And that's the point where you can say, okay, I have a choice now. Like, I know who I am without this box. I know who I am without this container that I've put myself in. Do I want to choose to bring this person into my life now? Do I want to choose to show up in this way? And if I do, all the people who only knew me as the me in that box are going to react. And it doesn't have to be a positive or negative reaction, but there's going to be a reaction because what they're going to see and what they're going to say is, well, I thought you were this person and now you're this person. And I don't know if I even know you anymore.
mhm.
And what I've said before is that your choice in that moment is, am I going to agree with their perceptions of me, or am I going to embody who I know I am and embody my whole full self? And if I choose my whole self, then it doesn't matter how they respond. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter. It will feel like it matters, but it doesn't,
You're
because I got to own me, and I want people to love me and recognize me for me, not for the box.
Yeah. Yeah. Or who they perceive you as being, but not who you necessarily are.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And the longer I
you're
let myself stay in that box, the longer I'm going to feel guilty. Like, oh God, this doesn't feel good.
mhm,
And I don't want that either. I don't want the guilt and the resentment. Like that can happen too.
mhm. Yeah, yeah. And you're describing, the work that we both do is to activate potential and to ideally it's always bringing people closer to the version of themselves that they really are and that they want to be. So it's the
Yeah.
authentic self, right? That's what we mean. It's an overused term that is beautiful, and it's important to really understand what it means. And it's like once you're able to see your own truth and walk in your own truth and be who you are, it almost always means in that moment where you're getting ready to speak your truth, it almost always means change. And
Mm,
sometimes it means little c change and capital C change, right? But it almost always means uncertainty. You don't know what's going to happen. It's like what I described in my example. Like I didn't know if I said, I can't do this anymore. I can't be this senior director of clinical services. I can't be in this organization in this role at this pace. I can't live in this house. I can't, all of it. Like everything that I had every single day, it was like I couldn't do that anymore. But what happens is that then you're like, people are going to be disappointed. Other people
mm,
have to change. Other people are going to have to adjust around you. When you move from a space, then other people have to move into a new space. And sometimes, like, as somebody who I always feel responsible for the people around me and their comfort, then
mm,
I recognize that it doesn't just affect. I can withstand the pain and the uncertainty and the disappointment and the fear because I've got a long history of being able to withstand that. But I don't always know that other people can withstand, and I don't want to inflict that upon other people. And so sometimes we stay in our lives for other people's comfort. And there came a point for me, and I don't know if this resonates for you, but there came a point for me where it wasn't just about me anymore. It was about I'm either going to let everybody else feel comfortable, and to myself, if I'm honest, myself comfortable, right? But then I'm going to be disappointing whatever divine power is out there that's given me all of this desire and wishes and hopes for my life and this unique vision that I have. I'm going to have to say no to that so that everybody else, including myself, is comfortable. And so, can I live with that? Like, just like I was
yeah.
led here, sometimes you're led somewhere, but then you're led away from it. But yet you learned something while you've been on this path, and there's nothing to negate. Like it's like being like I think about any beautiful story that we have, whether it's in spiritual world or biblical times, like there just because somebody set out, there's nothing that negates the entire trip that they took. Every single part of that path was important. But then it gets to the end and something has to shift. It doesn't mean that they should have never gone on that path. Oh gosh, they should have never walked down that road. No, my gosh, the whole road was so important. But we just don't know where it ends, and it's like that false sense of security that comes from we think we know where we're going to end on this path, but what we all
Mm,
really know is that if we don't walk our unique path, I knew in that moment that I was going to end my life in a space of regret, that I didn't have the courage to do something different, that I didn't know where it was going to end. That pause of, I mean, I remember that moment. So does this resonate with you? Like,
oh man.
yeah.
So here's my question. You enjoy music, I enjoy music.
Mhm.
Have you ever been to like a symphony, like where you're like bathed in music, but you don't know the piece that they're playing? Okay. So the question is, I went to this symphony, I bought the ticket. I must trust the composer, right? Like it's going to be good.
Yeah.
It's going to be good. I don't know how it ends. I don't know who plays when. I don't know when there's discord. I don't know when there's resolution. I don't know when the rest is going to come. But I
Mm,
bought the ticket because I know that when we reach that end point, it's going to be so good.
mhm.
Like I don't know, when a concert ends, I'm just kind of melted into the chair.
Yeah.
And I just sit there and I'm like, oh my God, just leave me for a minute. I just need to like
Yeah.
scoop myself up off the floor, but it's so good.
Yeah.
It's and we've talked about this before. Great composers build in those rests where like you reach this point and it's climbing and it's there's crescendo and it's just like you want to take this big deep breath and then there's this rest and you're on the edge of your seat. I mean, it's like a great football game where you're like, oh my gosh, wait, there's a commercial here? Like, hold on a second, but what's about to come is so good.
Mhm.
But what's about to come, you're not there yet. You're just anticipating what's about to come. You know it's going to be good. You know you've been built up to it, but that rest, that reset, that pause, that silla is there for a reason. And the reason it's there is because you there has to be a reflective moment where you take in everything that's led up to that point so you can appreciate what's coming after.
Mm. So this is really interesting. I was thinking about how often the pause, and I love that your description with music because it makes me think about translating it to emotions in our life differently, right? Because when we think about us as human beings, I thought about like the pause has actually got a lot of pain in it, but when you put the pause in music, there's not pain, there's just
Mm.
anticipation. The pause is like, right? And hang on just a second, my computer's gonna die. I gotta pause. Hang on. I'm not gonna lie, I think we should keep that in. That's awesome. Okay.
That was perfect.
So, but it's super interesting what you're saying because what I'm thinking about is in music, we wouldn't say, "Oh, there's so much pain in this moment, this pause," right? Because we've given meaning to music that there's not pain in music. Now, it may bring up a lot of different emotions in us, right?
Mm,
But it doesn't mean it's painful. We wouldn't say it's painful. We give meaning to music that doesn't allow it to be painful, but it brings up a lot of emotions, right?
yeah.
And I'm thinking about, like, I was thinking about, like, there's a pain, like, from an emotional perspective, when we pause, sometimes there's a lot of pain in that pause, but it's because I've ascribed meaning to that pause and I've said it's painful. But I also was thinking about when I pause and I'm in a moment of joy,
Mm,
when I'm like at a waterfall and I hit the top of a crest and I see the waterfall for the first time and I pause, I wouldn't call that pain. I would say I'm savoring it.
mhm,
I'm savoring this moment. It's like I'm seeing it really, really, really deeply. And so
yeah.
in that pause, I'm just seeing it deeply, but I'm the one who's giving it the meaning. Somebody else can come over the crest of that and be like, just a waterfall or something. You know what I mean? Like, who knows what kind of meaning somebody's going to have? But the point is, why does it have to be savored when it's pausing and it's something that is beautiful? Why do we give it this meaning? Why does it have to be pain? Why can't it be that in this moment where, oh my gosh, like I recognize that My body's exhausted. My mind is racing. I know there's some sort of that I'm not receiving. And I'm pausing instead of it being, oh, this is good. What if I had a perspective of the anticipation is of, I wonder what this is going to reveal.
Mm.
I wonder where this is going to go. I wonder if I trust this composer. This composer. I wonder if I trust this composer. If I could anticipate that this is a pivotal moment and there's going to be something to savor on the other side of this.
Yeah. So we talked about there being a discrepancy for some people.
Mm,
Um, man, it's not that it's easy to talk about this, but when you've done this multiple times and you're kind of, like I said, a student of the pause, you start to learn how to savor it and you start to appreciate it, and it starts to become beautiful because you make it beautiful. But there are individuals who I know, and you know, so many people who in the pause choose to self-abandon. And there's a lot of ways that this can go. Someone may just choose to avoid. Like they see the two different decisions that they could make, and they're stuck with one foot on either side, and they just are frozen.
mm.
And the pause is an avoidance, because if they just pause, then they don't have to make the decision. But how long can we realistically hold the position of standing with one foot on either side? Like,
Mm.
how is that? Is that sustainable? What happens?
Well, and I wonder how our awareness affects our capacity in that pause. So,
Hmm.
like, I think about like the first like 20 to 30 years of my life, and I didn't have access to information that allowed for me to go in a different direction. Like, if you, this is why it's dangerous. Some people think it's dangerous for people to go off to college, or it's dangerous for people to read a book, or it's dangerous for people to take in new information. Because if everybody around you wants you to stay the same version of you, then anything you take in new is going to change who you are. A book, a movie, a podcast, going off to college absolutely is going to change your perception of the world and what's possible, right? And so I think about, I've had the same thing from earlier in my life come up at different junctures of my life and at different ages. But it's felt different, and I've seen it different, and I've responded different as I've focused on that same event, and I've understood it differently because I've had more of an expanded view of what's happening. It's allowed for me to offer compassion because I see it from this other person's perspective. It's an opportunity for me to extend compassion to myself because I realize this is a younger version of me. It's an like, the more I take in around that situation in that pause of, wait, I know this, I can pull from this, I've been told this, somebody I trusted told me this. We have to be willing to take in truth. And we talked about this the other day, and this is incredibly important, I think. We also have to be careful whose ear we, like, who we take in. Because there's been times in my life where I've asked advice from somebody, or I've asked for somebody to give me a lens on something that I'm working through, that would never in a million years have made the decision that I made. That would never, they don't even have the line of sight that I have. And it's like, why am I asking for insight or perspective from people who would never make the decisions that I'm making? Or
Mhm.
look at my situation from my lens, right?
Yeah. Okay, I got this really cool picture because you went back to the waterfall. And so there's a moment when you're hiking up to a waterfall, like what we did at Rainbow Falls. There's that moment where you can hear the waterfall,
Mhm.
and you can hear the power that's in it, and you can almost feel the mist in the air because it throws so much water over.
Right.
And if you're down here, if someone's down here on the trail, because there's that last push up to the vantage point where you can see the full waterfall, you're up here. You're looking at the waterfall. You see it. You see all the glory of it, and you're in that pause, you're in that moment. And then you turn to the person behind you and you go, "Hey, from your perspective, what does this look like?" And that's what's happening when we're asking people for perspective on this pause, on this situation that we're in. "Hey, can I have your perspective? Because I really value what you have to say." But then you have to recognize that their point of view, their vantage point, is completely different.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they can only take so much information from you about what that waterfall looks like. And what they're going to do is they're going to apply their filter. "Oh, well, I've seen a waterfall before. Here's what happened. Or here's the stories that I have about it.
Mhm.
Or here's the waterfall that I'm currently viewing, and yours must look the same because this is my perspective."
Mhm.
And we have a choice there. And the choice that I found, at least for me, is when I ask their perspective, then I can go, "Wait a second. What you just said really stirred up a lot of fear in me. And I could feel myself contracting. And I know that when I feel that, that I'm not on the frequency of love. That's
Mm.
not my language. I don't speak fear. So I can take bits of what you said, and maybe I can use them to color a little part of this experience. Maybe all I was seeing was blue and I didn't see any of the green surrounding it. So what you're saying is valuable in some ways,
Mhm.
but you don't get to tell me what my waterfall looks like
Mm.
because you're not here. You're not me. Even if you were here standing next to me, you're still not me.
Yeah. 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 I think sometimes people can want to see your waterfall. Like I think sometimes people can see your lens and want to see your waterfall. And I'm thinking about so one of the reasons why I think this is such an incredible topic, just to kind of go a little further on what you're talking about with the discrepancy, is because there's so many times. So we're very tactile people, right? So we see this waterfall and we're seeing it with our eyes if we have sight, and we're hearing it if we have hearing. And if we so choose and we put our hands in the air, we can probably even feel the mist. Right? So we've got all of our senses taking in this experience and informing what it is that we're experiencing. Now, if you were to take this same scenario and you were to, instead of putting, the waterfall, and you were to put a person and you were to say you person and me person, I'm taking you in with my eyes, I'm taking you in with my ears, I'm taking you in just with all my tactile senses, right? This experience. What happens is just that in relationship and communication, there can be a discrepancy between what what we're experiencing and what our senses are telling us is happening. Like there's a disconnect. And that moment that we have that disconnect, it's the energy that we're actually experiencing. Like we don't realize that it's not just the outside world, it's the physical, inside of us. There's this energetic transfer, there's this energy and a cord that's very real, that is invisible, and it's the same type of substance that connects us with the divine. Like it's we know that there are people beyond us that lose their bodies, people that we love that lose their bodies, and then they become energy, and they're around us. And the same thing, we've now been able to measure emotions, and our emotions have an energetic frequency that is happening between us. So this is the consistency. If I'm speaking from a place of, "This is amazing. Oh my gosh, do you see this? This is amazing." And that person's like, "Yes, this is amazing." There's no discord. You're on the same energetic frequency. But if you're like, "This is amazing," and that person's like, it's just like, and you sense that, but you put that in the context of not a waterfall, but conversation. This person's like, "I'm not." getting what you're saying and you're like all excited. There is a disconnect because their energy, and they may say, yeah, yeah, this is great. This is awesome. Yeah.
Mhm.
So they're saying, yeah, 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 this is great. And they're pacifying you. But if you're the kind of person who is empathic, and we all have the potential to read this energy. It's an experience that we're all experiencing. Empaths are just people that understand the nuances of the energy. But we all are taking in energy. So knowing that, what that means is that when you're pacifying me and you're like, yeah, 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 I feel it. But I'm like, I don't feel like you're feeling it. That dissonance and that disconnect creates an incredible divide and pushes people apart. It's almost like a repellent. It's like the same emotion brings you together, which is why sports is amazing, unless you're on opposite teams, and then it pushes you apart. Right?
Yeah, I mean, I've had personal experiences where the hardest part of relating to someone for me was that I could feel the whole story they were telling. And yet the words that were coming out of their mouth were completely different.
Yeah.
And that gets to the next point of this that I think is so important, which is there is a conscious awareness of sometimes I'm saying this thing, but I'm actually feeling this, but I'm saying this because I want to make this other person believe that I'm thinking or feeling the same thing. But then there's an unconscious thing that happens where we're not even trying to manipulate anyone. We're just unaware of the fact that like we don't know how to put into words what we're feeling. We're so disconnected. Maybe there's been so much trauma or so much pain that I don't listen to this because this is fickle.
Mm,
So I'm up here. I'm not connected to this. And I've disconnected so far. It's a form of self-preservation. I've
yeah.
disconnected from my body so far that you can tell me that what I'm saying doesn't match up and I can't make the connection
Mm-hmm.
because I've pulled that circuit and it doesn't even
Mm-hmm.
connect anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the pause in that kind of a scenario would actually just be an opportunity if you're disconnected from your heart, which is where the truth is. Your pause in that kind of a scenario is theoretically connected to the story that you're telling yourself in your mind, which is your trauma cord or something that's happened to you. And so the pause actually just ramps that up, makes it stronger.
Yeah.
Whereas the pause, when you're pausing for the purpose of reconnection to your body, it's reconnection to your body first. It's reconnection to
Yeah.
your truth and yourself first.
Yep.
And then it's reconnection to somebody else. That's the pause, is you have this opportunity to leave so that you can get away from the energetic cord and the discord between you and that person. There's this thing that you can't do that yet because you're just trying to get back into yourself. And so once you can get safely into your own body and connect to your own personal experience and get some language and truth around that, then that's the opportunity to reconnect with somebody around this conversation because you're presuming that they're doing the same work. They're pausing, they're reconnecting to their self, they're getting their truth instead of this heady story. And it's like, okay, this is what I was saying and this is what I was feeling. What's your truth? Right?
Yeah. Yeah. So it takes two really connected, embodied, emotionally intelligent individuals to have a conversation where you can exchange information like that.
Yeah.
Because like you said, otherwise you're on two different teams.
Mhm.
And like, in fact, I wrote down even, okay, what game are we playing? What sport is this? Because if
Right.
I'm bringing a baseball bat and you've got a football, then we're not even in the same stadium, let
Right.
alone playing for the same team.
Yeah.
And then we can approach it a little bit closer and say, okay, now we both got our footballs. Okay, we're playing the same game, but whose rule book are we using?
Mhm.
Are we playing flag football? Are we playing full contact? Like, what's going on here? What
Yeah.
game are we playing?
Yeah.
And then we're like, okay, we agree to the rule book. Okay, now we're looking at this problem. Are we coming at this problem from two different sides? Are we on opposing sides of the problem?
Mm,
Or can we find a way to team up and get on the same sideline and huddle and say, okay, there's the problem. It's not you, it's not me, it's there. And what I want to do right now more than anything is huddle up and figure out, how do we approach this?
mhm.
We're on the same team here. What do we want? What's our outcome? What's the
Yeah,
outcome that we're hoping for from this? And
yeah.
my hope, honestly, is that this conversation, that we can take this conversation maybe further in a future episode and talk about, how do we do conflict well?
Mm,
How do
yeah.
we do that? Because conflict brings up a lot of negativity for people. But what's really cool is that conflict is also an opportunity to become more wise, more embodied, stronger individuals, stronger partners. It gives so much opportunity.
Yeah. Well, and what you're like, how do we do conflict well? I mean, yeah, I think there's just so much to that we can talk about related to that. And I think also you're bringing up um, the pause when it's one-on-one. Like the pause is like is different when it's just you're by yourself and you're trying to pause to get kind of it's like the description that I just gave a second ago. It's like sometimes we're pausing because it's bringing up strong emotions. The situation in front of us is bringing up strong emotions, and we pause to get ourselves back into our body and to um, rejoin to our maybe peace or our truth, or there may be like even to yourself there's a different reason why you might pause. It might be to figure out your truth. It might be to distinguish the emotion that you're experiencing so that you know what kind of epiphany is coming to you. Sometimes when I pause, it's to determine what's coming up for me. Do I have a understanding of this that can shift? Do I have a tool that I can pull from to get through this? And sometimes it's like, do I have an area that I need to grow in? And I need to take in more information from somewhere and asking the universe, like, hey, where do I go for this? Because I don't know what to do with this. I need like there's a little bit of like there's a few pieces of the puzzle that are gone and I don't have them all. Can you fill this in? Can we make this clear? So I think depending on if you're on your own in the pause or with somebody else, like you said, there's a different what's the game we're playing? What are we trying to accomplish? What's the outcome that we're trying to reach, either with yourself or with somebody else, right? Becoming to some sort of interpersonal consensus or interpersonal consensus.
And I think there's one more gradient of the pause that I think is really worth mentioning here, which is sometimes there are pauses that we don't come to and enter in because we've chosen them, but because like the universe is about to deliver something
Mm,
that we've asked for.
mhm.
And before we are capable of receiving that, we have to be the person
Mm,
who can show up and receive it.
yeah.
Like I've asked and I've asked and I've asked and I've asked, and why is it not coming? And what else do I have to do? And I've done everything that I know within my power to prepare myself to receive this thing. And why is it not here yet?
Mm,
And sometimes the universe is just like, I just need you to trust me and to pause just a little bit longer. You don't know why that is, but you know what you've asked for and you've put it out there.
yeah.
And it takes a heck of a lot of faith and trust to say, okay, I'm in the pause, and to remain present in the pause,
Yeah.
and to take every bit of the work that comes to you in the pause and to do it faithfully, so that when the orchestra starts playing on the other side of that rest,
Mhm.
you're the person who can hear it.
Mm, it's beautiful. Yeah, that really resonates with me, and I think what you're describing too, and that faith and that trust that you're having in that pause is it kind of it's like there's no need to avoid the possibilities that are getting like it's anticipating that something beautiful is being birthed, right, on the other side of it that you don't necessarily it's not your piece. It's not your you didn't come up with this piece of music, so it's not your piece. But if you trust the composer, then you recognize that there's always possibilities, that you can have faith and trust that there's always possibilities, that when something new is going to happen, that if on the other side of these past pauses that have been similar, there's been something beautiful, then you can anticipate that something beautiful is getting ready to happen now, right? If the pause has been a beautiful, is it interlude? I don't know.
Ooh, yeah.
Like
Yeah,
then,
that's right. Yeah.
yeah, then um, something new is getting ready to happen, right? You
Yeah.
can trust it.
Um, so this really cool thing happened when you said that, like it's not your piece. Both of the tattoos on my arms, it was like it was like a feeling of like when you're close to a magnet. It's almost
Mm.
like the ink was magnetic and I was getting close to a magnet and it was like pulling it. Like they both did it at the same time.
What
And
do you
then I'm
make of
like,
that?
I was like, what does this mean? Well, this one is God's peace. And this one is pause, is rest. And they're like, it is really intense right now.
Mm,
Um, what I make of it is this pause is a gift. And in the gift of the pause, you can find God's peace. Like my other tattoo is an anchor. Anchor in. Like anchor into the peace you're feeling right now.
yeah.
Because you can, it is within your capability to look at this pause and be grateful for it.
Hmm.
It's within your capability to, even in the midst of pain, we've both had great grief in our lives, great, deep, sinking grief. But we experience grief because we loved.
Yeah. Yeah.
I wouldn't trade the love not to feel the grief
Absolutely.
ever.
Right. Yeah.
So there can be this peace that is inexplicable
Mm,
that takes place in the pause.
yeah.
And I
Yeah.
just
And
think that that's an invitation.
I love it. Yeah. Just as we're wrapping up, like I just would add that, I think it helps in that moment where you're entering into the pause and there's this pivotal moment that it's either a lens of fear or it's a lens of love. And so I think this is an opportunity when you are from a lens of love and you're from a universal lens, there's a tremendous amount of peace in the pause. But it's that pivotal moment where you get to decide what the meaning of this is. And you're either choosing a lens of fear with the uncertainty, or you're choosing a lens of love and the universal and the peace that can be part of that.
Yeah. So we had a quote that I want to wrap up with, and I just think it's a great place to end. And it might be silly, but this comes from A. A. Milne's Winnie the Pooh. And the quote is, because although eating honey was a very good thing to do, there was a moment just before you began to eat it, which was better than when you were, but he didn't know what it was called.
Mm,
And so I think the invitation is, if you find yourself needing to take a pause, or if you find yourself in the midst of a pause, savor it. Find the sweetness. Enjoy the anticipation. Don't rush. Don't rush. So a special thanks to Asheville artist Melissa Moss for our cover art. You can learn more about Melissa and her work at melissamossart.com. And thank you to Cloud Cult for our podcast music. There's so much energy in us. You can find out more about them at cloudcult.com. Thank you for listening. And until next time, friends, peace, love, and light.